Just a brief disclaimer for those of you who may be new to this video, new to the channel recently, or have been on the channel. This is going to be a longer video. So make sure you grab your snacks, popcorn, blankets, pause it for bathroom breaks, whatever you need to do. Watch it now, rewatch it later. Just a disclaimer for you guys, this is going to be a much longer video. We're going to cover 3 articles. I'm going to put together a brief intro. The video will continue in this same video, but in a different clip. So I just wanted to clip together this brief disclaimer, just letting you know, brace for a longer video. Make sure you stay tuned for the entire video. There's going to be a lot of information coming from the articles, from me. So that way there's no confusion or questions in the comments that shouldn't be asked, or that shouldn't be asked, because it's going to be in the video, right? There's going to be lots of info. And of course we can further discuss in the comments, but a lot of the info sometimes that people put in the, the questions that people put in the comments were in that particular video, but the whole video wasn't watched. So the questions are being asked in the comments. So, and I can see that by the average duration of the video. So make sure you stay tuned for the entire video. It's going to be long. Make sure you pause, take breaks, whatever you need to do. But this is just a disclaimer portion. And the next clip will be the start of the video. Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Tyrone back with Tech Life. And if you just listened to the disclaimer, then you should be up to speed of what's happening in this video. And make sure you guys stay tuned for the entire video. There's going to be lots to cover, lots of information that I don't want you guys to miss out on. So like I said, if you need to pause, skip, rewind, whatever you need to do, go ahead and do it, because there's going to be lots to cover. So for the introduction, this is going to be a relaxed video. We're going to go over a lot in this video. So again, like I said, make sure you stay tuned, take notes, whatever you need to do, grab your snacks, go ahead and do that, because there's going to be lots to cover. So for the introduction, right, talking about T-Mobile small cells, we got to start with the baseline, right? We got to start with, where are they today with small cells? Do they have any deployed? What does that even look like? What size and scale did they take small cells as a standalone before the Sprint merger? So as an introduction, that's what we're going to start off with. We're going to start off with some of the history of T-Mobile small cells, what they might possibly have deployed. And then we're going to get into where they are after, post Sprint merger with the small cells, how they view the small cells. And then we're going to look into, where are they going with the small cells? How many total small cells are they trying to be at with the old small cells, legacy small cells, and new small cells that they're constructing in a deal with Crown Castle? So that will all be covered in today's video. As I said in the disclaimer, this is going to be a long video. I don't know how long, but it's going to be a very, very long video. I have my water ready. So let's get started. So coming right out of the introduction, we have an article here from Light Reading. And yes, it is an older article. It is actually 2 months after the merger between T-Mobile and Sprint closed, where Neville Ray spoke at a conference, and he talked about small cells, and he disclosed some very, very important numbers that people may have missed. So we need to start off with that in this first part of the video. So I want to cover this first part to kind of further explain some other points down the line of this video. Neville Ray, T-Mobile president of technology, explained that adding network capacity through the installation of adding small cells is time-consuming and expensive due to the need to obtain construction permits and equipment for the devices. And I touched up on that briefly in a video that I just made, I believe, yesterday. It's not just expensive from that perspective, but also from a fiber perspective because they lease fiber. And we'll talk about that later on in this video. So here is where T-Mobile is today. This is the legacy build before they gain any of the Sprint small cells, before they deploy any of the new small cells that they have a deal with from Crown Castle. This is where T-Mobile was as a standalone. T-Mobile said it owned 26,000 small cells and distributed antenna systems, known as DAS systems, IDAS, sites at the end of the first quarter of this year. That's Q1 of 2020. Ray said that figure would eventually double to around 40 to 50,000 small cells. So, and distributed antennas. So let me give you guys just a brief comparison before I continue. At its peak, when AT&T put in a massive contract to try and get C-RAN deployed, they were going to deploy between 40 to 50,000 small cells. And I have an article that I will post about that too, so you guys could check that out where that was listed. That was back in 2015, but as most of you are aware now, that got shut down in favor of media. So AT&T's RAN team, regionals, they were never able to even deploy the amount of C-RAN that they actually did need already back in 2015. But let's continue. As T-Mobile works to build its 5G network following the close of its merger with Sprint, he explained that much of the initial $40 billion in network spending T-Mobile has earmarked for the next 3 years would go towards building 15,000 new macro cell towers in order to raise T-Mobile's total number of macro towers to 85,000. So what he's saying at the end of this paragraph here is they immediately prioritize the tower builds. They're telling us, okay, this is the amount of small cells we have today. This is where we want to get to. But today, as it stands, after close of merger, we are going to prioritize the tower grid. And that took away some of the need to keep some of the small cells that they gained from the Sprint merger. And that will be also discussed in the other articles. So you guys are getting a full breakdown here of why they didn't accelerate the small cells early on in the merger and why they might need them or more of them now in the future as we take a future outlook. So yes, the macro deployment, the tower sites immediately took priority because one, they needed to add the 2.5 onto these sites as quickly as possible to build the anchor network because they needed to support additional traffic because of all of the Sprint customers that they were gaining in some of their largest markets. T-Mobile already had very solid market share in some of these markets, in some of the bigger PEAs like New York City, Chicago, Dallas, but they immediately gained tons of new traffic as they got the Sprint customer to join the network. So they needed to act, and they knew the quickest and fastest way to build that anchor network, it wasn't with small cells, it came from adding the 2.5 spectrum onto the towers. That was the quickest, fastest way that they could get large amounts of capacity back into the network, and they immediately acted on that. So for me, no surprise there. That's how they proceeded, and it paid off. Going into 2024, T-Mobile will have covered 300 million pops with the 2.5, and although they're still working through some of the Sprint keep sites, a large part of the merger integration will have been completed going into 2024. And, it's paying dividend. Look at their growth. Look at the numbers. It's all working out as T-Mobile had planned. So now that you guys know the baseline of where T-Mobile started with the small cells, where they go, let's look at how many small cells T-Mobile had once the merger closed. So this is an article from Fierce Wireless, which I will also link in the description in case some of you want to read the entire article, haven't seen it. T-Mobile has too many small cells, Ray says. That came out of nowhere, right? Remember, just now, they had 26,000 in the network before any of this. Post-merger, and so we have, same as we do on the macro side right now, I have too many, Ray said. We're in the 70,000 plus range on small cells, and I'll end it right there. Just briefly opening up that paragraph. Post-merger, Sprint small cells combined with the 26,000 T-Mobile small cells, they had 70,000 small cells in the network overnight. 70,000. So that's a lot, right? That's a lot. That's about 30,000 more in that network than AT&T was going to build at its peak during LTE. They were going to build about 40,000 C-RAN. If that project would have been approved, they were going to do 40. T-Mobile and Sprint combined had 70,000 small cells in the network, like I said, just about overnight. So he goes on to say, some of them, not a huge volume, but some of them are in areas where clearly now either T-Mobile or Sprint has a tower base that makes the requirement for small cells go away because of the macro strength and capacity I talked about. So again, going back briefly to what I said and what he stated in the other article we just checked out, the macro grid took priority. They immediately started adding 2.5 onto the sites, which now some of these markets, they can go up to 180 megahertz of spectrum. It took away the need for the small cells. They now had adequate capacity to serve the needs of the customer and serve the neighborhoods with some FWA, so the needs for the small cells went away. And if you think about it, it's a much smarter model. It's cheaper. You decommission a small cell. You don't have to pay the leasing for it, the fiber for it, whatever the case may be, right? So now that's where the synergies kick in, and you come back with some of the cost savings, because the deal that we're going to discuss in this video as well, that T-Mobile struck with Crown Castle, likely a better deal. Favors them, better numbers, better financials, because we don't know what deals Sprint had in place for their small cells, right? So now T-Mobile goes with Crown Castle, with which they've had a great partnership with them over many years, and they likely strike a better deal for the new small cells that are coming in the future. So, they decommissioned a lot of Sprint small cells. In my market, there are still some band 25 LTE small cells that are up, right, that are constructed, but they're decommissioned. So they're not on, but they're still there. And in a future video, maybe on X, if you follow me there, I can show you guys some of those small cells, post some pictures there. But T-Mobile never cared to upgrade them. And I feel, right? And I'll discuss that towards the end of the video when I give you guys my closeout commentary. I feel some of those small cells should have been kept and upgraded because they're placed in very strategic areas, I feel, to offload, to help FWA. So I feel some of those should have been kept. But again, from a bigger business perspective, it made sense because T-Mobile was able to serve the customer. At the end of the day, small cell or not, as long as you can serve your customer with adequate capacity, great calling, without any issues, it doesn't matter how you do it, right? From even a networking perspective, if you can serve that customer from the cell site without any issues, that's fine. And like I stated in a previous video, from a consumer perspective, they don't care where the connection comes from as long as it works. So this right away was a win-win for T-Mobile. They were able to serve the customer with additional capacity. They were able to serve the home broadband customer with additional capacity, all from the cell site. So immediately, it was an instant win-win for T-Mobile. So he goes on to say, indeed, Ray has emphasized the macro strength that T-Mobile enjoys. And while small cells will be a key part of the strategy, which we will get into later in the video, it remains focused on whittling that number to 50,000, a number that Ray has cited in previous discussions. So they want to settle at about 50,000 total small cells. And like I said, in comparison to an AT&T, when they had their plan ready for peak LTE C-RAN, they were going to do 40,000. So I truly believe that 50,000 is a very solid number in small cells to have in the network for T-Mobile. That doubles their footprint. If you remember, they were at 26,000. You get that to 50,000, that's double. Now, that will also include some of the Pico cells, I believe is what they're called, the DAS systems, indoor DAS, outdoor DAS. That's also included in that 50,000 count. So let's not forget about that, right? We need better indoor performance. We saw it recently in Vegas. In the hotels, they added some new DAS systems. They upgraded old ones. So that's all a part of the 50,000 plan. So we don't want to forget that. Excuse me. So let's go on to the next article. Crown Castle, T-Mobile reached deal on towers and 35,000 small cells. So this is another great article by Fierce Wireless, which I will also link in the description so you guys could check it out. So T-Mobile today has around 26,000. That number is probably higher now because they've already started construction on some. I saw some recent posts on Reddit where they're building in Times Square, Manhattan. They built some in Florida already. So that number is likely higher today, but publicly they have not updated us on the number where they are today. And I'll be honest, I follow the conferences, I follow the earnings calls. Nobody has asked the question where T-Mobile is today on small cells. So we haven't really gotten an update on that. So I don't know where they are, where it stands today, or how far along this deal is. This deal closed in January of 2022. So January 2024 will be 2 years in on this deal that they reached with Crown Castle. So I would assume that a lot of these small cell, or a good amount of small cells, are already deployed nationwide. Do they have more to go? Of course. Of course they have more to go. But again, this is a new, fresh deal that closed in January 2022. And like I said, decommissioning the Sprint small cells, likely a better business move for T-Mobile because they likely got a better deal out of Crown Castle with the 35,000. So if you go by the 35,000 and the 26,000 that was quoted in the Light Reading article we covered earlier in the video, puts T-Mobile at around 61,000 total small cells, right? That includes C-RAN, that includes strand mounts. So it's just some of the different variations of small cells that T-Mobile uses. And that includes, like I stated, the DAS systems, indoor and outdoors. The IDAS at the airports, hospitals, inside big buildings, whatever it is, that 61,000 number is the total number that right now that we know publicly is listed. If you add the 26,000 with the 35,000. Now, if T-Mobile gets there in a reasonable time, I don't know if that closes in 24, if that 61,000 is hit in 25. Maybe I can ask that during one of the quarterly earnings. They've taken my question twice already, so maybe I can ask that in one of the quarterly earnings, maybe Q1 or this next quarter coming up. But I think that sounds like a very strong number. It'll make for a very solid network. I would have to assume so. Of course, we haven't seen that come to fruition because we don't know if that's completed yet. But if you add 85,000 macros with 61,000 small cells and DAS systems, I think that makes for a pretty solid number, and it should make for a pretty solid network. From a capacity perspective, that should be all the capacity that they need if their future if they're projecting future growth. And that's from both wireless and fixed wireless. They should have, because Mike Sievert recently stated they're a future data analytics driven company. So the numbers should show them like, hey, in 2026, you will need X amounts more capacity to maintain your network. And that, and they still, beyond just the 61,000 small cells, they still have C-band DoD to add to the tower sites, but they can also add the C-band and DoD to the small cells. So that's something to note as well. There is some concern on my part, and I clarified that in a video that I just recently made about all of the customers that they're adding. But if they fully construct the plan as it stands, right, 61,000 cells, small cells, DAS systems, strand mounts, all of the macros that they're still building, right? There's still Sprint keep sites that will be built through 2025. And then you got the C-band and DoD combo. You can still add 2.5 on the small cells. I mean, that should make for plenty of capacity to serve their customer base for the rest of the decade. And I know there's other spectrum auctions coming up, and we can talk about that in a different video. But you really can't bank on those auctions right now because you don't know when they'll happen. You don't know how far out they will be. No, you have to work with what you have, and that's how you got to maneuver your business, moving forward. You can't stop and hope and pray that a new spectrum auction just all of a sudden appears. No, you can't operate like that. And then also, we still have that millimeter wave spectrum that they can also add on to these nodes. I truly hope that T-Mobile pivots in this round of small cell deployments with Crown Castle. I truly hope they pivot from the strand mounts, because a part of the 26,000, and I'm very confident in that you guys saw in the earlier article, a lot of that was strand mounts. Now, people have mixed feelings about strand mounts. They say they don't perform as well as a C-RAN, centralized RAN. And for those of you who don't know the difference between the two, I'll have to post pictures on the X platform, so make sure you follow that. A link to that will be in the description. So it's kind of a who you speak to situation. Some have told me strand mounts are fine. AT&T uses strand mounts. I've seen Verizon use them, but they are mostly focused on the C-RAN deployment. So I hope that in this next round, T-Mobile focuses as well more on the C-RAN. And I do think the C-RAN, if you look at the deployments, right, the strand mount, it just hangs from a cable. It's got a few radios on there. Doesn't really look, that reliable and that great performing, right? How far does that really reach? What's the penetration, right? All of that comes into consideration. When you have the C-RAN deployed, right, the small cell, it almost looks like a mini tower, where you could probably get more power out of it, further reach. So I just think, even though the strand mount technology is not that bad, especially if you're just using it to complement the macro grid, you're building it in dense pockets, it should be okay. But I still think the C-RAN is the better small cell deployment. And the fact that Verizon and AT&T are scaling that just shows you that is really the better option. So I hope T-Mobile does deploy that. I hope that they use the 2.5 as the base layer on their small cells. You can add C-band and DoD at a later time if need be. But I think for now, if you go on there, you add your 2.5 onto these small cells, maybe some millimeter wave, depending. I think that's going to make for like I said, a great capacity layer in those areas with decent penetration. Might even be able to offload some FWA customers onto it. Of course, wireless customers. So I think that's a much better approach to have that. If I look at Verizon's deployment, they have some nodes that they've built where they literally just deployed millimeter wave. And I think that's kind of a waste, regardless of how you look at millimeter wave, it has its limitations. Now it can penetrate glass, it can penetrate leaves. I'm not saying it's that bad. I never believed that to begin with. But also millimeter wave is not going to reach a mile or two, right? So I think we all understand that. So when you deploy a small cell with just millimeter wave at the end of the street in the neighborhood, and you have a busy major street that's going by that neighborhood, your mobile device will never connect to that millimeter wave at the end of the street, right? So I think if you added some other frequency onto that node, maybe some LTE stuff, maybe some C-band, I think it would make for better use. But again, Verizon, they can go back to those nodes at a later time, add C-band, add any other band that's needed if they feel the need to add additional capacity or additional range to that neighborhood. So just some closeout commentary to close out this longer video. The Crown Castle T-Mobile small cell deal is great for T-Mobile. It's also great for you guys, the consumer, because this should give you some ease of mind or peace of mind that, hey, look, even though T-Mobile is adding millions of customers nationwide, even though they're growing your individual market share, wherever that is, right? If you look at their growth, right, 3 million a year, you best believe that if you're in the top 100 PEA, they're growing market share in your market as well. And even in rural, maybe there's less population in your area, but T-Mobile is growing there too. So this should give you some peace of mind. Like, hey, look, T-Mobile has this already. They already signed the dotted lines. Some of this is already being constructed. Now, again, I don't know where this deployment is happening. They weren't very specific. Are some of these going to the rural environments? Who knows right now, right? I'll be honest. I don't know. I can ask. Like I said, I can ask some of my sources. Maybe I can ask them publicly at the quarterly earnings if they'll answer. I don't know. But for now, we know 35,000 small cells have been contractually agreed upon between them and Crown Castle. I think that's fine, right? From a leased fiber perspective, that might not be in T-Mobile's favor, and that's why I think this nightmarish comment from Neville Ray comes from, because T-Mobile can't just put up a pole and connect it up to its own fiber, because they don't have that. They don't own and operate it. So what happens in the future, right? T-Mobile has to work with a third party. Regardless of who it is, they have to work with them. Then they have to see, okay, when can you possibly deploy fiber in this neighborhood? If T-Mobile wants to deploy it in 2023 as an example, and the third party's like, we can't deploy that fiber and trench it until 2024, T-Mobile has no choice but to wait. So I think from that perspective, it's a nightmare for T-Mobile. Also, it's a nightmare in that sense because they have to get, the right-of-way permits approved. Whereas if you're an ILEC in that market, it's a bit of an easier process. It's still a process, but it's easier, I'm told, if you're the ILEC and you already have all of these other permits and stuff approved, right? T-Mobile is not an ILEC anywhere. So they have to go through the very basic steps of the permitting process to get that approved. With AT&T and Verizon being ILECs in a lot of markets now, they already have some of the very basic stuff approved. They pretty much just have to go through the regular process of permitting approval that it takes for any cell site or anything like that. And that's what I think he's referencing from the earlier article when he's talking about it's a nightmare to deploy these small cells, when it really isn't, right? You're just in the predicament that you're in that makes it a nightmare, but it's not really a nightmare for AT&T and Verizon. I seen AT&T deploy 2 C-RAN in a matter of like 3 weeks. It was quick. They got it approved, the right-of-way constructed, hooked up to the fiber that was already there, and they're done. It was that quick. It won't happen like that for T-Mobile, and it didn't. I remember in 2017 when they started the the strand mount deployments, that was also a nightmare, I was told. They had to work with Spectrum. Spectrum had to deploy the fiber. They had to, build some other stuff. They had to put it was just tough, right? You had to get Spectrum to go deploy the fiber. You had to get another third party to build the strand mounts. I mean, I was told it was very tough to get that project going. So again, just to close out now, the small cells are a great deal. That's added capacity, offloading the towers where you already have a lot of towers and density. You're offloading the macro essentially. And of course, the small cell will take on usage, but it should be able to handle it if it's strategically deployed, especially if you're deploying several of them across the neighborhood. If you're just going to go into the neighborhood and deploy one small cell, I feel that's a waste. I feel you need to deploy the CRAN in several different pockets. They don't have to be 500 feet apart, but if you deploy one on this street corner, one on the other street corner behind your neighborhood, one on the other side, I think that makes for a great volume and great offloading for the macro. So that should lift in speed. It should make everyone's performance around the neighborhood much better. And perhaps it might allow you to open up fixed wireless access for a few more homes. So I feel from an investment perspective, I feel it's a win-win. I feel it's needed in the network. And if they can get millimeter wave on those, I mean, if you can get millimeter wave on the nodes that you're deploying in the neighborhoods, potentially, right? Because we don't know for sure. We don't even know where the deployment is happening. But if they can do it to where they deployed in the neighborhood and they can get it millimeter wave on it, if they can get that customer hooked up to the millimeter wave spectrum versus 2.5, I mean, they've just created a longer term customer. Because 2.5 will still have its challenges, right? If there's higher wireless traffic, more people are downloading, FWA is affected. Again, with the millimeter wave spectrum, since its range is limited, you shouldn't have that many mobile users on that spectrum to begin with, right? It might be a few here and there, but for one, it has the bandwidth to handle the little bit of mobile traffic that it gets anyway. And it has the bandwidth, I feel, to really offer a home broadband product. Then you can go in and you can add port forwarding. You can add open NAT type. You can give the consumer, access to all of that. Whereas right now, T-Mobile has that fairly limited. With the millimeter wave, I think that becomes a real reality. And I think T-Mobile at that point could be like a real contender against like a fiber and even the Verizon FWA, because Verizon's FWA allows for all of those changes. Right now, if you're a heavy streamer, heavy gamer, competitive gamer, and I said this in videos a while back already, but T-Mobile's FWA is not for you because you can't change some of even the basic stuff. Like if you're on a moderate NAT type, which most T-Mobile users are, that doesn't really favor you if you're a heavy gamer. If you can't do the port forwarding, that's a problem as well. And I feel with millimeter wave, that could change for T-Mobile in a big way. Give them a different router that has millimeter wave capabilities, but also give them the capabilities to make those changes, to add open NAT type, to add port forwarding, give the consumer the option to make those changes. And I know T-Mobile is still fairly new to all of this, right? Home broadband, they're still in the learning phase. They discussed that very recently. Mike Sievert even said it. They're still learning this. So they still have a ways to go in everything. The small cell deployments, learning the home broadband patterns, learning the deployment patterns of where the small cells need to go. T-Mobile is still learning all of that because they were never really a big small cell provider, right? They had the strand mounts, but it's really not the same, if that makes sense. For an example, and I'll throw this in before I close out the video, AT&T has a whole department specifically for just CRAN, for small cells. Their other engineers don't touch that department. That's just a single department specifically for small cells. So, T-Mobile has a lot to learn still when it comes to networking. They've never operated at the type of scale that they are today. They never operated home broadband. They never owned fiber. They never really deployed small cells to a huge scale. So you have to take all of that into consideration as you think about T-Mobile through 2025, 2026, 2027. So that concludes this longer video for today. Just wanted to make that, give you guys all the articles, give you guys the information, give you guys a baseline, an introduction. Again, 26,000 small cells as it stands today. Really no update on that. They have a contract in place already signed for 35,000 more. They shut off all of the Sprint small cells just about. So again, they have a ways to go to build. They have a ways to grow as a company, and they have a ways to go to become more experienced. So make sure you guys stay tuned. If you're new to the channel, make sure you guys like, share, subscribe. Follow the social media outlets if you haven't for updates like the pictures of the different small cells and such. This is Tyrone with Tech Life, and I will see y'all in the next one. Peace.